Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. On this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the United States of America. Let's discuss additional consequences of Trump-Zelensky talks. Trump has begun taking actions against Zelensky after kicking him out of the White House. After a row with Zelensky, Trump ordered national security officials to check whether Washington could completely or temporarily stop arms supplies to Ukraine, Wall Street Journal reports. The US president is reported to be planning to observe Zelensky's further actions. Trump also is no longer interested in reviving the Ukraine minerals deal following Zelensky's disrespect aimed towards the United States. Trump will launch an investigation into the missing billions in US aid to Ukraine, for which Zelensky also admitted. And these are not the only steps that we will see from the United States of America regarding Zelensky related to him. Furthermore, we believe that in the very near future, the United States of America can start some investigations against Zelensky and his inner circle. Tucker Carlson calls for indictments against Zelensky, noting Lindsey Graham's speed of change. They're old friends, but Graham disowned him within an hour. It was more than just a momentary disloyalty, it was a scapegoat. Lindsey Graham knows what's coming next. Over the past 3 years, with the tacit support of its Western backers, the Ukrainian government has committed a significant number of serious crimes. The Ukrainians have sold vast quantities of American weapons on the international black market for 20 cents on the dollar. Those weapons are now in the hands of armed groups around the world, including Hamas, Mexican drug cartels, and the forces that now control Syria. God knows what the Ukrainians have done with the pathogens in American biolabs in their own country. Most likely we're going to see a lot of very interesting coming out in the very near future. Now let's discuss the situation with Zelensky, because as we can see, he is not afraid of anything, and most important, he's not afraid of the United States of America because he found support from the European Union. And yesterday, after the end of the meeting with Trump, he arrived in London, where he had very important and very interesting talks with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And according to information we have, Prime Minister Starmer says Ukraine's Zelensky has the full backing across the United Kingdom, and Zelensky left London not empty-handed. According to information we have, Ukraine to receive £2.26 billion under the G7 era initiative. Ukrainian Finance Minister and UK Chancellor signed an agreement to provide about $3 billion. That's a lot of money, and this money will be enough for Zelensky to hold his lines for several weeks or maybe even months. Furthermore, according to information we have, on the 6th of March of 2025, there are going to be another very important European summit where the European Union and countries will discuss what are they going to do next with Zelensky and Ukraine. And the European Union may provide Ukraine with hundreds of billions of euros in funding at its summit on March 6th, French President Macron said in an interview with La Tribune. Furthermore, we already know that Germany most likely will provide another 3 billion emergency aid package to support Ukraine. German Foreign Minister Baerbock has called for the immediate creation of the European Union Defense Fund in response to concerns raised by the Trump-Zelensky clash. So summarizing everything, at least 6 billion euros Ukraine will receive by 6th of March, and that's a lot of money, and this will be enough for Zelensky to hold his lines, obviously, for 1 to 3 months in war with Russia. But Russia is not sitting on their own place. They're trying to find a solution how to break this summit, and the Russians are going to use event case that took place on the 28th of February. I'll remind you that on the 28th 28th of February, the Ukrainians attack international infrastructure facilities that Russia, Turkey, and some European countries use to support and supply Europe with gas. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation gave their own statement regarding the situation. On the night of February 28th, against the backdrop of Vladimir Zelensky trips to Washington, the Kiev regime, in order to stop gas supplies to European countries, made another attempt to attack the infrastructure of Ruska compressor station in the settlement of Kodzor, which supplies gas through Turkish stream pipeline. With Ukrainians attacked this pipeline with 3 drones. So this is very important because the Russians are trying to use this case against Zelensky. The Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs already had several talks with the Turkish Prime Minister, with Turkish colleagues. Furthermore, Russia had a call with the Hungarian Foreign Minister. Russia had a call with Slovakia, and these 4 countries managed to create their own common strategy of behavior, and the most important purpose of this strategy is to ruin the summit on the 6th of March. Hungarians and Slovakians are saying if Ukraine continue attacks on this pipeline, then most likely they will be against any fundings, any allocations of any funds to Ukraine, which is obviously unacceptable for Zelensky. But we know that Zelensky currently doesn't want to accept anything. He believes that he is the only one who can think and who can make decision what to do next. Slovakia will not support Ukraine either financially or military. That was stated by Prime Minister Robert Fico. Furthermore, Hungary considers attacks on the Turkish stream infrastructure by Ukraine as an encroachment on its sovereignty, said the country's foreign minister. Furthermore, when talking about this upcoming summit, both Hungarians and Slovakians are going to force European Union to include statements about the ceasefire and about the infrastructure in the resolution that most likely the European countries are going to adopt during this meeting. Let's discuss this in details. Financial Times. Orban demanded that the European Union start direct talks with Russia on a ceasefire. He also expressed disagreement with attempts to develop a unified approach to the Ukraine issue among the European countries, the publication writes. So we see that the Russians are going to do something with this, but we believe that anyway, the European countries, Slovakia and Hungary and Zelensky and Turkey are going to find a solution how to protect and secure this pipeline, which will allow the European countries to allocate additional funds to Ukraine. As for the Ukraine itself, during the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of very interesting updates regarding the situation, and we see that the Ukrainians suffer huge problems. And something tells me that the Russians are planning for a very, very big offensive operation in the very near future. First, let's discuss what's exactly make me think like this. First of all, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, during the previous several days more precisely, the Russians attacked the settlements of Odessa and Chernomorsk, and as a result of those attacks, lots of buildings, lots of facilities were destroyed. The Russians targeted strikes on military logistic facilities and Ukraine armed forces accommodation points. The sources are saying that when talking about Odessa, the Russians managed to destroy the concentration or some camps or some buildings that Ukrainians were using for their FPV drone operators. The sanatorium was used as a reserve temporary deployment point for the Ukrainian armed forces. In adding, foreign activities was recorded which could be related to the training of the naval drone operators. After the strike, the emergency evacuation of Ukrainian armed forces personnel was recorded. So the Russians during the previous 10 days destroyed a lot of Ukrainian positions, a lot of Ukrainian camps, military exercise centers with FPV drones. Another important video came to us from the northeast of Dnipro. The same story. In this video, we can see how the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover a very huge concentration of Ukrainian soldiers. Hundreds of soldiers in this military camp was being trained to use drones of different types. When the Russians discovered these hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers, hundreds of future FPV drone operators, the Russians destroyed the entire camp. camp. The Ukrainian sources reported that as a result of this attack, the Russians managed to destroy up to 150 drone operators. Obviously, this is the biggest loss of FPV drones operators since the beginning of the special military operation from the Ukrainian side. So, which means that this is the second case for the previous 4 days when the Russians managed to destroy huge concentration of operators of drones of different types. But I'll remind you that during the previous 2 days we've been talking a lot about more Russian strikes. For example, if you remember, somewhere on the 26th of February, in the vicinity of Zaporozhye, the Russians managed to discover another concentration of Ukrainian FPV drone operators, and as a result of Iskander strike, this concentration of FPV drone operators was also destroyed. The Russians are saying that during this attack that took place around 26th of February, the Ukrainians lost up to 85 soldiers. Most of them were future or current FPV drone operators, including different instructors that were training them. Furthermore, I'll remind you that almost at the same time, in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Shostka, we can find another video how the Russians managed to discover another huge concentration of Ukrainian FPV drone operators with a significant number of equipment. The Ukrainians, as you can see, came on their positions with the purpose probably to prepare themselves before possible attacks deep inside of the territory of Russia, but the Russians discovered this concentration of forces, and as a result of Iskander strike with cluster round, managed to destroy this camp completely. So, summarizing everything, since the 26th of February, the Russians made at least 4 precision strikes on the positions of Ukrainian FPV drone operators. During this strike, we don't know for sure how many Ukrainians suffered, but most likely several dozens were destroyed. Let's say 20, 30, something like this. During the attack in the area of Zaporozhye, according to information we have, the Ukrainians lost up to 85. And according to information we have, as a result of attack in the vicinity of Dnipro, the first video we watched 5 minutes ago, the Ukrainians lost more than 150. So and Odessa, of course. So summarizing everything, since the 26th of February of 2025, the Ukrainians lost up to 300 of FPV drone operators and operators of drones of different types as a result of Russian precision strikes. Obviously, this is huge losses, and most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to replace these losses in the very near future. And we know that without FPV drone operators, Ukrainians have no chances to repel possible Russian full-scale offensive operations, because only drone operators is the only weapon that can stop or slow down the Russian army. Now let's discuss the situation in Sudzha, where the situation is getting worse and worse for the Ukrainians. You know that during the previous several weeks, the weather allowed the Russians to advance in this area because the temperature was much below zero, minus 16, minus 20 per Celsius. That allowed to the surface to get frozen, and that allowed the Russians to use tanks through fields, through tree lines, through big spaces, and that's allowed the Russians to break through the Ukrainian defense belt. And as a result of this offensive operation, the Russians managed to tighten the noose around the main supply road N07. And the problem is for the Ukrainian side that the weather currently is getting better, and according to information we have, it's already the second or the third day in a row when we see the temperature let's say up from zero, so +1, +2 by Celsius, which means that the surface in this area has the poorest quality ever, and the Ukrainians are no longer available to use fields, for example, for counterattacks. And the most important, due to the weather conditions, the Ukrainians are no longer able to bring their forces in the side of Sudzha pocket through the fields. Now the Ukrainians have just one option: to use their vehicles just along N07 road or just along roads, which means that in the very near future the Russians will destroy the significant number of Ukrainian FPV vehicles because they will use just one road. And this information was also confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources. Deterioration of the situation situation in Kurshina. The biggest problem in the Kurshina, in Kursk area, is the fire control of the Russian armed forces over the entire logistics on the defense forces. Starting in January, the Russians have been increasing their capabilities to control Ukraine movement, and for some reason appropriate decisions have not been made on Ukrainian part to eliminate this problem. During February, it began to reach its peak, and the biggest complications between after the loss of Sverdlika, which they tried to restore, is not very well throughout the way. So which means that Ukrainians will be forced to use the only road, and the Russians need to improve their positions, probably to bring several more operators, FPV drone operator squads, and this will lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense, and most likely the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from this area. Furthermore, the Russians continue improving their FPV drone forces, so they continue improving their fiber optic technology, and during the previous 24 hours we got more videos of how the Russians were destroying the Ukrainian positions on the territory of the settlement by the name of Malaya Loknya, on the territory of the Sudzha pocket. So most likely big disaster is waiting for the Ukrainians in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the central Kupiansk direction. Today several Russian sources reported that the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the Boguslavskaya direction. According to information we have currently the Russians control something like this. We don't have any geolocations or any proofs that can confirm this, but some pro-Russian resources reported that all these fields is under complete Russian control. So we are waiting for additional geolocations that can give us 100% sure, but as for now we see that the situation might be very critical and difficult for the Ukrainians. As for the South Donetsk direction, during the previous 24 hours we got a lot of very important updates, and we know that by the end of the 1st of March and by the beginning of the 2nd of March the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the vicinity of the settlement of Burlatskaya and Stepova. Furthermore, the Russians reported that the settlements were completely captured by the armed forces of Russian Federation, and for example the Russians also published the video where we can see the process of how the Russians were clearing the settlement of Stepova, how the Ukrainians were retreating, how the Russians were FPV droning them, and in the final part of the video we can see a building with the Russian flags. So this village was completely secured. As for Burlatska, we have just confirmations from the Minister of Defense. As you can see, the Ukrainians tried to counterattack the Russian units, but they were destroyed on the territories of the settlements of Veselaya, Shevchenka, and so on. So we see that the situation for Ukrainians is difficult, and for example by the end of the 1st of March we got report that the Russians managed to improve their positions even further in the northern direction, and currently several more tree lines and strongholds were captured by the Russians to the north of the settlement of Burlatsky. So something like this was already captured and secured by the Russians, and we see that the Russians now are trying to dig in between the settlement of Shevchenka and Veselaya. So the Russians continue their offensive operation. The Ukrainians are trying to redeploy forces to the area of Zelenogai to the north with the purpose to prepare defense in this part, but the Russians control everything and destroy everything. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.